was at that point in Bank of America and I uncovered my mission statement, which I'll share, when I look back and reflected, I'm like, it was there all along. That's when you know it's true. And my mission statement is to uncover truth and make it known to empower others.
Hello there, OrthoPreneurs, and welcome to another episode of the OrthoPreneurs Podcast. Today we have arguably, and I've had a lot of guests, today we have arguably one of the most well-rounded, eclectic individuals we've ever had, right? So let me introduce to the show Amy Demas. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you so much, Glenn. Great to be here today.
Oh, it's truly my pleasure to have you here. And I know you're excited about it, but I'm doubly excited. So keep that in mind. And by the way, we'll get into this a little bit later, but that lighting behind me, that was my best guess at trying to get gold. I was trying to get gold for you because of a place you spent some time at one point. And I suspect that gold is one of their colors, but we'll get into more of that later on. Am I right? Is gold one of their colors?
Yes, it is.
I thought so. And it's not, people, for those who think I'm foreshadowing, it's not Notre Dame.
If you could read the sign behind me, you can tell what it is, if you can make that out.
But you can't. So, So Amy is, many of you know Amy. She's spoken at OrthoPreneurs Summit. As you can tell over her right shoulder, you can see the amazing twisty award that we like to send to all of the speakers who speak at OrthoPreneurs Summit. To rave reviews, I might add, Amy, so thank you.
Thank you.
She is a wealth of information, and she's been through the trenches, if you will, in many ways, both figuratively and literally. And I'm going to let her tell you a little bit about her story in just a minute, but personally, we've had the opportunity to work with her in our office. And I'll get into that a little bit more in just a minute or two, but she really is somebody who, if you're looking to work on communication, just a team in terms of the new patient process, interaction with culture, like this is a woman who can really help take your team to the next level. And so before we get into all that, Amy, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about how you ended up where you are right now?
Well, it's definitely a winding road how I got there. You know, I started in my adult life working as an engineer, until they're
right?
A mechanical engineer, woo, and that was great until you have an economic downturn, and in a consulting firm, you get laid off. Well, then I became a homeschooling stay-at-home mom. I thought that's what I was going to do the rest of my life. That sounds good. Well, and then when you become a single parent, you return to the workforce, and I ended up working for Bank of America as an engineer. And I thought, okay, that's where I'm going to be. But then as life had it, I had a life coach who introduced me to this Dr. Don Demas, who's an orthodontist. And you get, drawn into that office, work in that office, work through every admin role and thought, okay, I'm going to be his treatment coordinator when I thought I would never do that.
Right.
And then cancer struck and knocked me flat on my back.
Wow.
And then when you come back from that, you go, what am I going to be when I grow up? And you go, I got to go back to my roots. And I'm a teacher at heart. I love seeing light bulbs turn on for people. And so that's how I came to be a consultant when that was never on my radar to be able to do.
Well, you do a great job with it. You really are wonderful with it. And for those who don't know, she is the president of Communicate-Excellence, which we'll get into a little bit more in just a moment or two. What's unique about Amy Cromwell Demas is she is a graduate of
United States Military Academy. I'm going to have to say I attended because I did blow out my knees and finish elsewhere. But I did go to United States Military Academy early when they accepted women.
The U.S. Military Academy at
West Point.
There you go. Those are the words. I just wanted to, you're so humble. It's incredible. And so I'm going to scream your accolades from the rooftop. What was it like? What year did you go to, by the way, did you go to West Point?
So I was the class of 1990. And so the day I entered in 1986 was the 10-year anniversary of women ever being allowed into West Point. Mm-hmm.
So in today's day and age, obviously where Me Too movement has been humongous, right? And the ability for women's rights to excel in a tremendous way. There are women like yourself who are breaking barriers in many ways. Back in 1990 in West Point, what was it like to be a woman in West Point in 1986 to 1990? Was it what I would think would be lots of harassment and talking down to you a lot? Or was it the opposite where they were afraid of doing that and it was more deferential?
Oh, I wish it was deferential, but it was not. So the entire environment is meant to be hazing putting stress upon you. But the interesting timeline of when I was there is some of our tactical officers, some of our professors were females, but they were at a time when they could not attend West Point. So they almost had a grudge on their shoulder that you were there and they didn't get to be there. And so there was a lot of animosity that you didn't ask for there. So you had that built in to the natural environment of high stress. So it was crazy. It was crazy.
Wow. But you're one of your coaches, right? Your life coach graduated, was behind you, right? A year or two behind you. And actually flew Apache helicopters.
Yes. She's class of 91. She was on the soccer team. And she is an amazing wellness coach. You know, you had that out on the Facebook post, and she really helps not only think about your actions, but the mind before the action.
Do you mind giving her a shout out? What's her name?
Yes, Tracy Fisher, Fisher. Well, and she's the wellness coach.
Well, anybody looking for a good wellness coach? Tracy, you said?
Traci Fisher, Fisher.
There you go. So I'm a fan of coaches. I've had many coaches in my life. For those folks out there who've never had a coach, and again, for those who don't know about Amy's background, this is not a woman who's just sort of like a low achieving kind of individual. By all standards, Amy, I would call you a high achiever.
Thank you.
You know, in many ways. So what does a coach bring to someone's life like you, who has a mechanical engineering degree, attended West Point at a time when it wasn't, it's never easy, but at a time when it certainly wasn't easy for women to attend West Point. Somebody who's Six Sigma. I mean, like, we'll talk about a lot of these things later. What did a coach bring to your life? Why did you seek out Tracy?
So I have Tracy for my wellness, and I've had a different life coach for different aspects. So I think, well, coaches provide you a way to mirror back to you what you're saying and what you don't realize you're saying. So they're very helpful in that. They also help hold you accountable. So a good coach isn't solving things for you. They're helping you uncover and discover what you may not know. And that's the difference between a counselor and a coach. I like to think counselors help you look back and fix what's in the past, whereas coaches help and mentors help you look forward and reach forward. And so my other life coach, Nicole Krieger, she was the first one years ago who said, you need to be a consultant, when I was like, I could never do that. And she spoke into my life years before it ever came about. And it's amazing how a coach will help you.
That's awesome. Yeah, I agree with you on when it comes to coaching. I think it's really important for anybody to have, I'm a fan of therapy if people need it. And most people who need it don't know they need it. Right? Like, that's the joke. If you think you need therapy, you're not the one who necessarily needs the therapy. But I do believe in coaches, and I've always had one in my life, at least in the last 10, 15 years. I've had people at some point in and out. You also, personally, I have to tell everybody, she's been an amazing mentor, Amy has, to my own daughter, who's entered the workforce at age 22 now, leaving college. And, one of the things she and I, meaning me and Amy, have talked about is, you've had a pretty meandering story through life. You've done it all. And I've certainly changed careers at least once or twice in my life. What do you think about the value if you had a 20-year-old, 22-year-old young lady or man in front of you, and they said, I really want to get a jump start on my career. I got to get moving. I got to get this thing, I'm behind. And you hear it all too often from drivers. I'm behind. I know what I tell my daughter, but I'd love to hear what you would say to that 20-year-old or 22-year-old, for anybody listening out there, or for their kids.
Well, the biggest thing is we tend to think from that perspective that the one decision we make is what we're going to have to live in through our entire life, which puts a lot of anxiety on there. I would rather see us thrive where you are, because then your next station, your next place, you're going to carry forward what you learn from there into the next one. What I would also love to see people do is, I went through a course where I uncovered my own personal mission statement, and that helps you know how to say yes and no to things.
Yeah.
So that you're not just saying yes because it's what everybody else is doing. And when I was able to do that, and I was at that point in Bank of America, and I uncovered my mission statement, which I'll share, when I look back and reflected, I'm like, it was there all along. That's when you know it's true. And my mission statement is to uncover truth and make it known to empower others.
Wow.
And when I look at when I was an engineer and I had these engineers who were much older, who didn't know how to use a computer, helping them, when I homeschooled, creating curriculum, when I was at Bank of America, empowering executives to understand their metrics, it's there all along. So that's what I love doing.
No, it's wonderful. It's wonderful. And I want to add to that I think it's important that the younger generation, and when I say younger, I mean anybody younger than me, that you're in no rush. I mean, the truth is the average person who, say, graduated ortho residency 10 years ago, right? They'd be somewhere around 35 to 40 years old now, right? Somewhere 37, 38, 39 years old. They are likely going to live, statistically speaking, into their late 80s, early 90s in good health if they take care of themselves, at least late 80s, early 90s. I firmly believe, and nobody talks about it, and I'd love your feedback on it. I firmly believe that sunk cost bias keeps orthodontists in their career way longer than they need to be. And what I mean by that is most orthodontists are going to do just fine financially. They're going to do great, and they're going to be wonderful at it. And if you've listened to any of the studies or research on the fluid intelligence curve, where we go from being able to create and do into more wisdom and teach as we hit our 40s and 50s, the idea that you're going to be as good of an orthodontist at age 65, 70, 75 as you were at 35 or 40 is just a fallacy. No oral surgeon can do it. No neurosurgeon can do it. No orthodontist can do it. You can continue going, but you're not the same orthodontist you were. Your skills will deteriorate. We know that. It's been proven. And I would love to be the one out there to start saying to orthodontists, you're going to do great financially. Practice your 20, 25 years. Hit your 55, 60 at the most, and go on to, you're going to have financial means, hopefully, to be able to go on to that next thing, right? You've spent enough time, money, and energy. You don't have to believe in the sunk cost bias. Well, I became an orthodontist. No, go into a nonprofit, develop a new product, become a coach, become a teacher, become I firmly believe that if you're going to live to 85, 90, 95 years old, you should do meaningful work your whole life, work that allows you to collate the wisdom you've created. And I don't know if you agree, disagree, what your thoughts are on that.
Well, as you're saying that, the picture that comes to mind is the average life cycle where we see the curve go up and then it begins to fall.
Exactly.
But a wise person, it goes up and then you recreate and you recreate,
exactly.
you recreate and you recreate. That is the picture that came to mind as you described that. And when I think on my own career and how many times it's changed over, I think I would have been bored if it had been static the whole way. And I think we get into a locked mindset and not a learner's mindset when we only do one thing forever. Now, a version of that for orthodontists as they are within that career is trying new techniques, trying new things to keep us fresh, because that is one of the things that limits us is when we get locked in and we don't want to grow.
I agree. And when you were going with your hands like that, I've talked about it a couple of times on the podcast, so I won't get into much detail with it right now. But it was that interview on Rich Roll's podcast with Arthur C. Brooks out of Washington, D.C., who's a brilliant man who's been like one of the world's top French horn players. He's also been in think tanks. He's a brilliant man who really is leaned into this whole fluid intelligence curve. And his point is, even if you learn new techniques, you will not innovate those techniques as you get older. You're not going to, at age 65, learn how to place implants, let's just say, and suddenly become great at placing implants. It just doesn't work that way. But you can become a great educator. You can become a great book writer. You could become a great podcaster. You could become a great whatever. But his point was you go from creating and doing into collating and providing wisdom. And in his interview, what really got me thinking about this was that he was sitting in front of a man on a flight from LA to New York. And it was a nighttime flight, and he heard this old man behind him talking about how nobody cared about him, nobody was listening to him anymore, that his life was a waste, he had no purpose, he's unimportant. And his wife kept saying, no, honey, everybody. Well, when the flight landed and everybody got up, he looked around and he saw that this is somebody that's world famous. Everybody knows him. He served our country in many ways, so much so that when getting off the plane, the pilot of the aircraft was waiting outside the door to thank him for his service to the country. He wouldn't mention him by name for obvious reasons. But here's a man who everybody knows, who served the country, sitting there feeling as if he's unimportant and that nothing's happened, because he never did that second swing up that you talk about. He continued doing what he was always doing. And as the old saying would go, he rode that dinosaur into extinction. And that's what I love about you, is you're always innovating and always coming up with the new places. And now you're a consultant.
I know. Can you believe it?
That's amazing. So let's talk a little bit about what you do and how you help practices, because we brought Amy into our practice, and it was an absolutely, I'm trying to come up with the right adjective here, because I don't want to say awesome or fantastic. I want to use a word that may not typically go with consultants. It was a heartwarming day. It was a day where you made everybody feel included and special. I don't mean that in like, everybody gets an award because they all showed up to the finish line. You made everybody feel included. And Amy's approach towards communication, from phone to patient communication, is truly amazing. So do you want to talk a little bit about what Communicate Excellence is all about, and maybe what would make you different than, notice I don't say better, but what makes you different than some of the other great people who are out there talking about communication?
Sure. Thank you for asking. My biggest thing is I want to work on small, repeatable habits, because I realize that as we are in our offices, we are busy taking care of patients. And Glenn, until you want to take your whole team and send us to Aruba for 3 months like the Biggest Loser and work on habits there, we're going to have to work on these things while we're taking care of patients. And so I find the capacity for change is small, because habits they are grooves that our brain loves. And our brain says, why would I change something? Don't you realize I'm doing something so that I can be on alert for whatever other dangers or things I need to be on the lookout for? So we have to, in some ways, sneak up on our habits. And so that's why after I listen to, oh my goodness, I probably listen to 15,000 calls a year at this point, if not 20,000. Oh, yes.
1,000?
Yes.
Wow.
As I provide coaching, I do that. And so I very much Toastmaster these phone calls. I provide evaluations on phone calls. And then my engineer part of it said, well, what's the 80-20 rule? Where can we make the biggest impact that is most common across the board? And so it's these small, repeatable things that if we do that, elevate communication while still maintaining the personality of the people. And that's where that cooperation comes as I work with scheduling coordinators, because I listen to recorded phone calls, or treatment coordinators when I watch their recorded exams. I'm very big on that feedback loop, just like those Olympic athletes. They didn't get there without a coach. They didn't get there without that feedback loop. So that is a principle in which I work to make sure we have repeatable habits that are small and will actually be executed instead of just head nodding at.
Right. Which is something we see a lot. And just that little nugget you gave us just now has like 30 questions in my head. So I'm going to start first with, let's go backwards a little bit.
Okay.
Let's talk about something you brought up with my team the day you were there. Let's talk about Six Sigma. So you want to tell everybody a little bit about that and your involvement with it and what it really means to the end user, if you will.
Okay. So Six Sigma, we're looking to reduce variation so that we can get a consistent and repeatable performance. And actually, I do have a green belt in the Six Sigma, designed for Six Sigma when my time at Bank of America. And so you're always trying, you do Pareto chart. What are the things that are most common so that you can deal with those instead of trying to make an answer for every single solution? So that is a principle behind it. And the Six Sigma, we want to make sure that we get that variability reduced, or when there's a variability, we also have an action plan to help with it. And so that's why we want to fix that. And then we also have a plan for when we have upset callers as well. So we're trying to help in all those ways. Because the biggest thing we're trying to do is, you may remember that moments of truth model I showed you that Procter & Gamble had. We want to give a great performance on the call, through the yes, through the patient experience so that we get that ultimate moment of truth where they share, which helps the next call,
Right.
the next win. It's like a perpetual motion machine that we want to get going.
Yeah. And for those who don't realize it, Six Sigma is serious stuff. You know, her green belt in Six Sigma doesn't come from an hour or two course where you just sat on a weekend. You're talking about a serious communicator here who also, as a mechanical engineer, I would say probably predisposes you really well to the little steps that have to add up to make the machine work, if you will.
Turn the dials.
Exactly. Turn the dials. So we're talking a little bit about phone calls. So let's stay on that topic a bit. There's a couple of questions I have there. The first question is, if you don't mind throwing out a little nugget here or there, what's the most common mistake? I hate using that word. There should be like a new word, but what's the most common area for improvement that you hear when you listen to calls? And my second is, how does this translate over in, and this, I'm sorry, I'm springing this one on you, Amy.
Yeah.
How does that translate over into the changing world we live in where phone calls for new patients are becoming less common and emails or Instagram or Facebook messages are becoming more common?
Okay. So we want to have some commonality of the rules we follow. And the biggest thing that I notice across the board when I start with individuals, and that is even after a training day, is we get things backwards. So when we open and close calls, it's all right, what's your name? Right. Oh, it's like, oh, there's that sergeant mode. And then when we get to offering appointments, when do you want to come in? And it's almost like this bowing, whatever you want. And it's backwards. I don't know why we get it backwards, but that's what we do. And so it's like I'm uncrossing the wires there and trying to make sure that when we open calls, we want to prime that conversation into something positive. And we say, yes, I'm glad to help you with that. And then when we go to offer calls, we want to be the guide. You've got to remember, you're like air traffic control. And the pilots aren't asking air traffic control and telling them when they're coming in. No, air traffic control's telling on there. We can still do that in a polite way, but it's in a very guiding way. So that is the most common thing that we work on and why we start from the beginning. And then I do spend times on those new patient calls and the new patient experience, because we've got to remember the ultimate goal of that. Let's have a conversation and start a relationship, whatever the modality is.
Right.
We can't be interrogators in that process. We've got to be the start of a relationship, because they're looking around and we've got to stand out against the competition. And if everybody else is being an interrogator and we're being a connector, you're one leg up already.
That's beautiful. That's such an important point. I called the doctor's office this morning, as a matter of fact. And, you know, she answered the phone almost along the lines of, what can I do for you? Like, not quite that bad. And I like, my rage started bubbling up inside of me. Like, this is not how healthcare should be. And it got a little bit better until she transferred me to somebody else. Just basically, what's your birthday? What's your name? Okay, hold on. And
exactly.
I was like, well, that's the medical model, unfortunately, right? And it's pervasive. But here's the part that's interesting. You said that is the most common thing you see, correct?
Absolutely.
That the person is a drill sergeant at the beginning, right? And then they're the USO at the end, right?
That is exactly right.
Right.
You know, and it's not like they're being ugly, mean, but it's simply an opportunity. It's an opportunity that we're not taking hold of, that uncommon courtesy to drop it in there. I remember when I was telling my brother-in-law of this, opening the call with simply a happy or glad, priming that conversation. And he has a child that has prune belly syndrome. So they're to doctor's offices all the time. And when I mentioned this, he just about fell backwards. He said, oh my goodness, if I ever heard that, I would be shocked. I would be shocked. And here's the thing, when my clients start using it, you can almost hear it on the phone. You can hear that caller. You say, I'd be happy to help you. And they go, oh, you can almost sense them like, oh, like that puppy dog sensation.
Yeah.
They don't expect it. And they're like, oh, that's different. So from the very beginning.
It's disarming. And again, the interesting part of all of this is it's the most common thing you see after listening to 15,000 calls a year, right? And yet, out there right now listening to this podcast episode are dozens or hundreds of orthodontists who think that their team is answering the phone the way they should and are not, because you said this is the most common thing you hear.
Mm-hmm.
And every orthodontist that I know of would say, well, I've worked with my team. They answer the phone well. They're great people. I've worked with them. I brought in professionals. And yet it's the most common thing you hear.
Yes.
So if it's the most common thing you hear, hey, folks, if you're an orthodontist listening, your team may not be answering the phone the way you think they're answering. And something I did, which I would just throw out there, and I'd love your feedback on, something I did, and I'm not a trained professional, obviously. I've taken a lot of phone training courses, and you know, I've had a few years under my belt, right? I started auditing our calls. I started listening, not to one or two, but dozens. And I created a scorecard, right, of all the things that were important, because if it's not measured, right, it didn't happen. And so I created a scorecard and listed, and I'm trying to think of the right word, mortified, panic stricken. When I started hearing our best phone answers answering the call, just even little things, it blew me away. And it took me a solid 3 months of one-on-one training with our lead of our communication center to basically just work with her one-on-one in person at lunches, just developing that relationship so that we could go back to the kind of things you spoke about, the kind of things that I've learned in other courses. And it is remarkable, folks. Inertia will drag, mission creep. How's that? Mission creep. Little changes will happen little by little by little by little until you're no longer aimed at the moon. You're heading to Pluto. And I think it's important for everybody out there. If you don't do anything else, if you don't call Amy and ask her to help you with your team, which I am an advocate of, and I think you should, but even if you don't do that, at least listen to your calls and hear what's going on. And if you can't listen to your calls, start figuring out a way to listen to your calls, right?
Absolutely. Because not your namesake, but it sounds like it, because there's that Dunning-Kruger effect.
Oh, the Dunning-Kruger effect. Like, you and I could talk Dunning-Kruger for the next 3 hours. We didn't discuss this ahead of time. That is, I pulled my 18-year-old son aside not too long ago. He's on the spectrum. And I said to him, dude, you're not deep on the spectrum. You're just suffering the Dunning-Kruger syndrome. And I'll let you explain I explained to him what that meant, because I think it's so valuable. So do you want to explain to everybody out there who doesn't know what it is?
Absolutely. So the Dunning-Kruger effect is this thing that we're not good self-evaluators. Let's put it that way in short.
That's an understatement of the Dunning-Kruger.
It is. You know, when they ask 100 Americans, are you in the top half of good drivers, and 88 out of 100, mathematically impossible, say they're in the top half. Or if you ever watch on Netflix the series 100 Humans, they actually put 100 people in black sweat tops and bottoms, no names, in big taped off squares outside. And they had these lab people saying, humans, look around. At the count of 3, raise your hand if you're in the top half of good looking compared to your neighbors. Over I think it was 90 of them raised their hand.
Compared to your neighbors.
Compared to your neighbors. So, you know, we are not good self-evaluators, even though sometimes we think we're self-loathing. So here's what happens. We go to training, and the mindset is we can be like a teenager. I know that. And my encouragement is to lean in, because if we don't, everyone says, I always, and I never. I always do that. I never do that. And reality is usually somewhere in between. And the way to overcome the Dunning-Kruger effect, one is learn what a standard is, because you don't even know where the goal is. And the second, receive feedback.
Yeah.
There you go. You know, and so that's what we do. And then sometimes as we get that feedback, it's almost better when the feedback is from somebody that's not emotionally attached. And you know, so a lot of what I teach isn't necessarily rocket science, but because it's coming from an outside source, it's disarming from that aspect of it. It's why when I go to teach at a place, I never listen to any recordings of anybody before I show up. You know, it's a part of trust for me. You know, it's like when my nephew finally got to learn to tie his shoelaces, he said, Aunt Amy's going to help me. And he learned it in minutes when his mother couldn't learn. He couldn't learn from his mother. Right. And he turns to his mom and go, why couldn't you teach me that? And she's like, just be happy for him. And so that's, you know, when I end those presentations, it's like when I was with you, I want to be like that Aunt Amy for your practice. That person that's the outside person that can provide that feedback in a disarming way.
But you do it in such a loving, inclusive way.
Thank
Claude
you.
Silver, who's spoken at Summit twice, who I love to death, she's the chief heart officer at
Mm.
VaynerMedia in New York, which is just a 2,000 person organization. She was there from nearly the beginning. She's got the biggest heart, arguably, of anybody I know, present company present company excluded. I'm saying that, Amy. And her cultural sort of rubbing on me is like love, 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 love,
Mm.
right? And that's not who I am by nature. I'm a driver, right? I'm not a love on people, though I do love on people. Sometimes it feels contrived, right? But you do it in such a sweet, wonderful way that your teaching just comes across in the right way. And when you talk about self-awareness, I want to talk about two things here. Number one, the Dunning-Kruger effect is in full effect in the ortho world, right? Because you can see a lot of people who stand on a stage and lecture. And I want to say this now, I'm not thinking of any individual in particular. It's something I've noticed over the last 5 years that how much CE do they take? Now, I'm not saying how much CE do they go see a friend at. When you see some of these people standing on stage, how many courses do they personally go to a year? Or do they feel like they've mastered everything related to the world of orthodontics? I see it very commonly, and I've pointed it out I'm never going to mention names because I'm not thinking of anybody. I'm just saying, hey, orthodontists, you're accomplished, you're brilliant, you're very well-rounded. You may have been practicing for 10 years. You need to take more CE and more personal leadership and management courses. You need to learn more, right? Because you don't know what you think you know. And as a self-evaluator, you are not, one of the top 10% drivers, right? Everybody thinks they are. So I'm just saying that to orthodontists and to myself, because I try to get to every course I can lay my hands on, because I will never, ever, ever, ever stop learning, right? And so that's number one. Number two is, how do you take this whole concept of feedback and apply it when the current crop and generation of team members, in my opinion, and the opinion of many others, is radically different in terms of skills and goals and the way they take feedback versus even 3, 4, 5 years ago. Nowadays, it appears if you even with love and kindness and a personalized massage from a massage therapist and getting their nails done and a pedicure at the same time, and you ask them to please make sure they come back 3 minutes earlier from lunch, they don't even show up after lunch is done. They never come back. How do you handle that? And this is not endemic just to orthodontics. This is across the board. How do you give feedback today? Or do you think this is crazy and it's exactly the way it's always been?
No, I fully agree with you. And one of the things that I think that helps in my unique ability, one, I've gained the trust, but then because I use their actual recordings, I show to them, I'm looking for your trends. I am not trying to get in there and play gotcha to you. And when I listen to those recordings, I'm playing back clips. So I said, here is the standard. So this is refuting the Dunning-Kruger. Here's the standard. All right, let's go in and see where your baseline is compared to that. And you play 4, 5, 6 clips, one after the other. So they're not listening to the entire conversation. It's just like bang, 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 bang. That serves like a mirror to them. And you know what it's like when we sit here in front of Zoom. We get on Zoom, we did our hair in the morning, we get on Zoom, we go, oh my heavens, what? And that's almost the sensation that I get when I work with them. They go, oh, I didn't realize. Yeah. And so we're celebrating the wins. And it's not me saying it, it's the mirror saying it, it's the recording saying it. And so that's disarming, which, Glenn, I know we know this. When we have an issue, when we put it in between us, it's a problem. When we put the issue out to the side, we're both then evaluating it. And those recordings are a way to take that and put it out in front of both of us and see how we can work on it instead of between us like an argument.
Yeah. And again, I'll just say it. And this isn't going to necessarily, I don't want to come out the wrong way because it's going to appear as if you're not good at other things, but you're good at them all. But you're like the Gen Z whisperer. You really are.
Thank you.
You really are. You're great with everybody. That's why I didn't want it to come out the wrong way. Everybody I know who knows you just loves you. And you're such a thoughtful and warm-hearted communicator. But like my daughter, she's 22, right? It's hard sometimes to talk to a 22-year-old who's coming into the world. And Lord knows we have some great conversations, but they're not Amy conversations. And again, I'm just saying out there, my daughter's in such great hands with you having conversations with her because she really, really, really gravitates to what you have to say. And so for anybody out there who's having trouble with Gen Z employees, team members, what have you, this is a woman here who really understands how to talk to them in a really good way. And
Thank you.
Before we close up shop here, let's talk about what are some other little tidbits or morsels that you want to throw out there about things you've seen as common places for improvement when it comes to communication in the office or just observations?
Well, one of the things I would like to encourage you to do, let's go to your new patient call. If I can ask you to do one thing, yes, I told you the ultimate goal is have a conversation and start that relationship. Please move that setting of the appointment earlier up in your conversation. Break up your questions because think about it. What is that caller calling for? An appointment? And you sit there holding them hostage until they answer every one of your questions before you finally give them an appointment.
Great point.
You know, get on and see it from their side, you know, and set that up, ask for enough information to discover and figure it out, make the appointment. And then together, maybe you need to gather a little bit more information. And don't double ask them things. Don't double ask things that you're going to then ask them to fill out all over again on your new patient forms. Don't exhaust them. So if you bundle all that, it's start to see things from their perspective. It may not be as efficient for you, but what's the experience you're creating?
I love that. I've listened to a lot of stuff and I've heard people eliminate stuff, get rid of stuff, but setting the appointment early in the call is amazing. I love that. And now they're more vested in you because now they've got an appointment with you. So answering your questions becomes more, like you said, it's on the side together.
Yes.
It's brilliant. Because if I ask you a million questions about you before we have an appointment, it's for me. If we have an appointment, now it's to the side of us because we're both working towards what you just got.
Exactly.
Mind blown here, Amy. I'm done. I'm hanging up the phone. Although I don't know if anybody remembers what this means when you're hanging up a phone. You got one more for me?
Let me think if there's another one. Oh, when we have a frustrated caller, the L, I have an alert acronym, the L for listen. Make sure you let that frustration diffuse before you jump in. I can usually tell when we're frustrated and we feel like we're justifying because we're jumping in. And the picture I want to leave for you is think of the Instant Pot. What happens when that pot is venting its steam? They tell you never, ever, ever interrupt the flow or you're going to get burned. Same thing happens on your phone calls.
Yeah.
Let it vent. Now, I'm not talking abuse, but if it's vent, let it vent. And then you can get in there, empathize. Oh my goodness, I can understand why that's frustrating. And then when it's vented, you can put your hand in front of there. You can actually take the lid off and see what's really going on inside.
Yeah. So
there's your last tidbit is when you have somebody frustrated, listen first.
So true. So true. Just think everybody listening, when you've been frustrated with a company or a person and they let you talk it out, and as long as they feel empathetic towards you, right? You know, I taught my communications center woman, maybe incorrectly. She's not originally from the United States. And so someone would talk and the first word she would always say back, it just like made me wince because she's a wonderful, sweet, amazing person who listens beautifully. But after listening to you vent for 30 seconds or a minute, her response back would always start with the word ma'am or sir. I was like, I love you. Stop. Don't use ma'am or sir. She goes, why? It's a sign of respect. I said, they're not ma'am. Like, no, you just plug the Instapot back in.
Exactly. Or like I said, oh, it just makes me go, oh,
yeah, just
poke the bear.
Yeah, exactly. So, and you did bring up one point that I can't let go. I have to ask. We understand someone's upset. They feel they were overcharged. They feel they didn't get an appointment they wanted. They feel something happened in clinic, a reasonable concern that they're bringing up and angry and upset. And maybe they're a bit privileged in their life and they want to really, they deserve things their way, right? But what do you do when it's an abusive? Because you said, as long as it's not abuse, what do you consider abuse? Where is the line, for those who don't know it, between somebody who's just venting steam and getting angry versus abuse? And then how do you teach a front desk to handle true abuse?
For me personally, I like to think of that line when it crosses over into vulgarity,
Okay.
shouting. It's not the why is it always like that? That's a frustration. It's when we get into the vulgarity, we get into the yelling. You may have to then put your wetsuit on and let it kind of run off until it runs off and say, I want to make sure we get to the right solution. May I bring this to the attention of my office manager? And at that point, anybody can be the office manager. May I have 5 minutes for me to talk with them about this? Because what you need is time and space in there. And a lot of times, if we can get back to them after a period of time, they may kind of regain their consciousness around that and realize you heard them and it's really gotten escalated. So we really need time and space in there. So if we can still listen through it and then ask for their permission to get right back with them.
And don't say ma'am or sir.
Oh my goodness.
Sir, I hear what you're saying. No, just don't go there. I don't know where I learned this from, and I'll throw this at you and tell me what you think. I can't remember where I learned it. It was maybe that the negotiation book, the Harvard Negotiation Project with Uri, and I don't remember who I learned this from, but it was a great comment that there's different personality types, and you have to know how to deal with each one when they're angry. And something I learned, which really, when someone tries to own you, when they're the kind of person who's not yelling, screaming, or being vulgar, but they're trying to run the conversation and not letting you, I learned that this. They said, putting your hands in a timeout, a T, everybody on the planet knows what that means. And it stops them. And then you ask them a question about what they're trying to scream at you. Hey, you go like, oh, timeout. And they stop. You go, hey, I'm sorry for interrupting. But when you say that you're upset about the thing, what does that mean? Where are you coming from? What does that really mean to you? Like now you're diving, they're not just ranting. You're actually stopping them and diving to what matters more to them. And it's actually worked really well. Like it's remarkable just to,
yeah, that's good. That's great. Because again, there's that time and space that you're trying to gain. You're trying to interrupt it.
So before we go, I have to ask you about miscommunication and a lost quarter. I need to ask you about miscommunication and a lost quarter in a machine. I know there's something, but I got to find out what it is.
You never know how good you're communicating. Sometimes when we're communicating, we think we're saying the same thing, but we're going like this. So actually, this story comes about. It was the night before I entered West Point. We were staying in a little motel before we get onto the post. And my parents had sent me out with the quarter to go get a bucket of ice. And so I go to the ice machine.
You got to pay for ice?
You had to pay for ice.
That is one low-class motel.
Oh, it was. It really was. Highland Park, Highland Falls is not upscale. So I put my quarter in. I lose my quarter. Okay, I don't get ice, and the machine has my quarter. I return back to the room, and my parents say, "Did you lose your quarter?" I'm like, "No, I didn't." And they're like, "Well, where's the ice?" I said, "Well, I didn't get it." They said, "So you lost your quarter?" I said, "No, I didn't." They're like, "What do you mean?" I said, "I know where it is. It's in the machine." I didn't lose it, but they had lost it. So sometimes when we're communicating, we're doing this. And so we have to pause, ask more clarifying questions because we think we're connecting and we're not. And so communication is a very interesting game and challenge.
Well, neither one of you was volunteering what was really on your mind, right? Yeah. They were asking, where's your quarter? Not where's the ice? They didn't care where the quarter was. They wanted to know where the ice was.
Right.
And all you cared about is you put the quarter in the machine and, it didn't do what it was supposed to do. And how old were you at the time?
Well, let's see. I was 17. And that's when my parents said the night before West Point, "Oh my goodness, she's going to get eaten alive." My brain probably wasn't in gear the night before going into West Point.
Well, it worked out just fine. And did you ever get the ice?
No, I don't think we did.
No. And yet everybody survived.
That's right.
Well, I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart, Amy, for everything you've done, both, professionally in the office and personally by helping mentor my daughter, because you're a true lady of the highest distinction.
Thank you.
I want to ask if anybody wants to reach out to you to learn more about how you might be able to help them, how should they reach you?
So my website is communicateexcellence.com or the email, amy@communicateexcellence.com.
That's Amy with Amheeiy.
That is
Right.
the traditional, over 50-year-old Amy, AMY.
AMY. Is there a younger Amy spelling that I'm unaware of?
Oh, well,
You said over
there's
50.
well, yeah, sometimes there is a double E at the end or
Yeah,
an
it has a
IE.
silent K.
Yeah, something of that nature.
But thank you so much. And for those out there, I can personally vouch for the fact that Amy is truly the team whisperer. She's really your team. She makes it fun, exciting, enjoyable with some great information that you will definitely benefit from. And so that's communicateexcellence.com or Amy at communicateexcellence.com. And I hope a ton of people reach out to you because it means we're making a difference.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Amy. Have a great day and appreciate you.